Welcome to You and Your Money. And I've been teased recently by people saying, you've been saying welcome to your money for over 20 years and you need to find something new to start with. Promise you, next week I'll find some new words. Well, our program this evening focuses on retirement and financial planning. Any financial plan needs to incorporate short, medium and long-term requirements. Everyone's definition of this period is very different, and I'd like to share two stories with viewers. My grandmother got a phone call many years ago from her bank manager, and he said, Mrs. Stern, I know you've got money in the bank. You don't ever, the money has stayed there for years. Let me send one of our financial planners around to see you to talk about investments. My grandmother said, look, my grandson's in the business and he's always spoken very simply about short, medium and long term. Let me tell you my time horizon. Short term is 1 week, medium term is 2 weeks, and long term is 3 weeks. You see, I am 99 years old. And then I had a client join me with her grandson a few weeks ago. She wanted to help her grandson invest. He's just started university. He's 18 years old. And I explained to him, short, medium, long term. And I said, what is your time horizon? He said to me, short term is 2 days, Monday, Tuesday. Medium term is Wednesday, Thursday. And the weekend is definitely long term. So everyone does have a different perception about short, medium and long term. And joining me this evening is Lesecha Manaring. She's Managing Director of KLU Wealth and Legacy Management, and Daryl Bennett, Wealth Advisor, Sasfin Wealth. Lesecha, Daryl, thank you very much for joining me. I'm very pleased to see you're in our uniform. We're all in blue. I mean, thank you for that. But your blue's a little bit brighter now. Nice to have you, Lesecha. Lesecha, as it's ladies first, you see, we still do have the age of chivalry. So as it's ladies first, just talk to me about how do you see the short, medium and long term when you're talking to clients?
Thanks, Bryan, and thank you for that. And also it's been recently, it was International Women's Day, and also it's very fitting because we also find that, especially with our female investors, we actually live longer, so we've got a longer time span. So it is so important to actually appropriate your money accordingly, to make sure that your short term, your medium term, it is so relevant, because when we as financial planners understand that in a lot of depth, we help put structures in place and put the investments in place that are going to suit that time horizon. For example, if you have a short term, so I would call short term anything from 0 to 2 years, and this is money that you know that you are going to be using. So it's, for example, funds that you'd be saving for a house, saving to buy a car, saving for renovations. That's a short-term, medium goal. And then you obviously cannot invest in a high-risk portfolio. It's not necessarily structured to beat inflation. So
you would agree that's not called investment. You've got to differentiate between investments and savings.
Exactly.
0 to 2 is saving.
Correct.
No risk, certainty and security.
Absolutely correct. And it's important to understand that. So if you have money sitting in a bank and you haven't kind of apportioned it accordingly, you will invest it or save it inappropriately. So then the medium term is the money that you perhaps need after the 2 year space. So I would say anything from 3 to 5 years. So that's money that you don't necessarily, so if you're looking at young children perhaps that are going to be going to university or that sort of thing, 3 to 5 years is anything that funds that you don't anticipate using, that would be considered a medium term. And again, your financial advisor will then give you a good investment or a good structure to meet that goal, so that you are constantly beating inflation where necessary, obviously taking the risk into account. And long term is where we all need to be putting funds in, because there you should be investing to achieve more growth, because inflation is quite, its official stats is quite low. But if you consider things like food inflation, if you consider a medical aid, it's very important to invest appropriately. So that is actually the start. Managing your cash flows according to time is a good start of your financial plan. So we spend a lot of time understanding, unpacking and having plans. What are you going to need this money for and for how long?
Daryl, before you answer, I'd just like to add another thing. In terms of when you talk about short, medium, long term, do you think that many people are not taking enough risk and not being enough growth orientated for the long term? So maybe your views on short, medium and long term, and then just comment on that.
Well, first of all, I like what Warren Buffett said when he jokingly said, he had one regret in life. He wished he would have started saving when he was younger. He did his first investment when he was 13 years old. He was trying to get the message across of the power of compounding. And compounding's power comes in the fullness of time. So to me, a long-term horizon is definitely 10 years plus. If you look at the equity returns over any 5-year rolling period, it's pretty much positive. But one's got to take a 10-year plus view, and also one's got to ascertain or understand what they mean by risk, because it might be an education. Somebody might think that they're taking on a risk, but once they're educated about how equities and how companies work, that risk might not be as severe as they think it is.
You know, I'd like to share, last week we talked about investments. I had David Shapiro online with me, and he did showed a very interesting slide. And this is what really, because when you're looking long term, you've also got to decide, you know, how much equity, how much property, how much offshore. And he showed a slide which showed 71% of South African listed companies earn more than 75% of their income offshore. And if you take mining, that goes to 81, who earns more than 75%. And if you break those 81 companies, 30% of those companies that make up 60% of size earn 100% offshore. However, he took a situation where he took the rand in 10 years ago and he converted it to dollars, and he said, right, if I put in the South African market, even though all these companies are earning money offshore, what will that result? And if I put in the American market, what will that result? I'll give you the figures, they may shock you. If you put $100 10 years ago in the South African market in dollars, it would be worth $121.
Sure.
And if you put it into the American market, it's worth $317, even though these South African companies are earning. So that must go, it must give some credence to your investment strategy when you're putting this together. How much offshore? Because even pension funds now are allowing 45% to go into offshore markets.
Absolutely, Brian. I think you raise a good point. So, and again, it speaks to, I definitely find that clients are not investing for the long term. I feel that a lot of, and it's a risk, it's a discussion. People are not comfortable, they don't understand. So I do find that clients are very conservative when it comes to long-term assets and how they should be, and definitely underweighted in offshore assets, because again, it's a lack of knowledge. It's and you know, territories that we don't understand, and there's a lot of turmoil as well with elections and wars. So people are generally very nervous about it. But again, if we are able to teach our clients to say exactly the stats that you've just mentioned, how important it is with our GDP and where the world is going, we definitely need to be investing properly offshore. Obviously, have the conversation, but I definitely a minimum of 40% should be, I think, in offshore assets, to make sure that you get the growth, especially if you want it to be in line with inflation, if you want your money to be relevant in the long term. But it's not without risk, but again, education.
Daryl, let's talk about your 10-year view and upwards. So now you are restricted in terms of retirement funding, but in terms of any other form of funding, if I'm looking for growth.
So if you're looking for growth,
how much would you take offshore if I've got a 10-year time horizon?
I don't know why people differentiate between offshore and onshore. I understand in the pension space, because you've got Reg 28 and you've got restrictions of what you can go offshore. But outside the pension fund, it's best to look at the best companies in the world. If some of those companies happen to be on our market, then that's good and well. But if they're not on our market, then go offshore. It's no indictment on South Africa. It's not a competition to say, well, why should I give it to America? What about South Africa? If you look at the themes, if you look at where the world is going, and you look at the top companies, they've got pricing power advantage that are doing exceptionally well. They're not on our market. So the more you send offshore, the more you can send offshore, the better.
Daryl, are you nervous a little bit about phase in providing clients appropriate advice? Because, you know, generally people, you know, I talk to a client over 10 years, you've got 120 months, and after 4 months he phones me and says, well, I'm down on my portfolio. And I said, but you've still got another 116 months to go. It's amazing because, you know, if you invested in property, no one puts a board outside your home on a daily basis or monthly and changes the price. Because if they change the price, as has been happening the last 5 years in South Africa, you'd be lowering the price all the time. But because you're getting information from the investment houses, from the unit trust companies, companies, from your stockbroking and reports. You're seeing results. And you know, it's a funny thing is, particularly if you've got a segregated portfolio, someone will get a segregated portfolio, they'll have 19 out of 20 shares up. They'll have one red, which is now just interesting. And the first thing they'll look at is that red. Why is that share down? Well, you know, with any market, you know, there are different timings for different industries, and some are now struggling because of high interest rates, but when interest rates come down, they will start to benefit. So do you think phase, your responsibility to provide appropriate advice, gives you a little bit of are you a bit nervous because...
No, not at all. I think phase is there to protect us. It's there to protect us and guide us with our clients. And if it's documented. So what I do with my clients if they're going into growth assets, I don't call it high risk, but growth assets with the right time horizons, it's important for them to see the table of the amount of money they can lose in a period of time. Are you comfortable that you can be down 20 or 30% in the first year, Mr. Client? Are you comfortable you can be down in the second year and down in the third year? This is what you can make, and this is what you can lose.
Darryl, that would have happened in 22.
Yes.
Anyone who invested January 22, come the end of December 22, were down.
Correct.
Anything by 20 to 25%. And anyone who came in the 1st of January 23, they'd made up most of it.
Exactly.
But at that point in time, there were awkward discussions with clients.
Yeah.
Well, as long as it's documented clearly enough and the client can understand it and they've signed it off, the phase is there to protect the client and to protect the advisor.
Darryl, how do you think financial advising has evolved since the day you first started?
Yeah,
which is a lot less than, I think I've been in the industry double your time, but I won't, just keep that as a little bit of a secret. But how's it evolved? Differently?
It's evolved with Bryan. It started many years ago, maybe even before my time, where you had the insurance salesman or the retirement salesman that would run around with a briefcase and maybe would sell 3 or 4 products that were quite opaque from the insurance companies, which in principle was fine. If you put money away when you were younger, as we spoke earlier, you would have built up a nice nest egg. Unfortunately, there was opaqueness in it. There were unscrupulous brokers, and it then evolved from being an insurance salesman to an independent salesman to a financial advisor, financial planner. Now where it's going is coaching. It's now we're reaching an era where we're using the psychology of money, we're using behavioral finance, we're using all the sales techniques, we're using our skills. But in order to coach the client, it's important to get to know them, to understand who they are, to ask them questions, to be curious about what they want to do, so give them autonomy to make the decisions.
Well, we're going to take a short break. I hope you're enjoying our program. If you are, I know you'll be back with us. Stay tuned.